what has been very beautiful for me is that my job has been about was to heighten the moment of engagement with the work to the best that I could, to either heighten the collective or to heighten the individual sort of relationship to that work.
Architect David Adjaye, thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed. The Dissolve is being billed as possibly the world's first all-video biennial, so I wanted to ask you, as an architect, not only what was the challenge of designing an all-video biennial, but one that has 3 distinct exhibition spaces envisioned within it.
In a way, there's 3 things. There's basically the idea of a maze, a garden. I kind of use landscape metaphors just as a kind of way of trying to evoke the idea. But the opening sequence is to really move from the outside world and to move into a sequence of spaces which are more akin to a sort of garden or a place of discovery. So what I wanted to do was to present a video show where when you came in immediately there was this emphatic sense of delight and spontaneity and that you would see work, but you would also see other work behind it, so that you were never in this sort of sense of, oh my god, here I go, I'm going into the dark tunnel and I'm just going to have to go through it, no matter how much you love the work and whatever else you were going to do. But there was this moment where you were visually stimulated by a series of sort of pieces that were coming at you, and I call it the kind of sort of landscape strategy. It's a kind of transition from the incredible light of Santa Fe, actually coming in the daytime, to a sort of blue hue. And the notion of really designing this show without black, which is what the traditional thing is, black or grey, but to use blue, in fact to use blue, green and red as the kind of sequence, was really important to me. That actually, as well as trying to kind of set up this way of perceiving, that you were also creating atmospheres. And this notion of atmosphere is very important to me in where I work, but this notion of atmosphere within a journey where you're really looking at approximately 30 works. The first room being this sort of landscape strategy. The second room was really to try and it was really playing with the wording that Sarah and Daniel again were sort of talking about, but this idea of a cinemascope. And I felt that, in a way, if the first moment was a kind of an arrival, the kind of journey into this kind of content and the discovery, the second moment was a kind of transition into a certain sense of understanding the narrative of this, and in a way, a certain way of becoming what I call a kind of community, a collective community, which is for me a kind of speaks of the kind of way in which cinema kind of made this kind of new sense of public and community that was part of the mid-century, mid-20th century, early to mid-20th century, or the late 20th century. This idea that we'd gather in a room and we'd be emphatically gazed on a sort of rectangle, which would kind of project all these ideas to us. So somehow it seemed that once I'd kind of got you interested in this idea of spatially exploring, I wanted to then somehow bring this notion of the narrative, the kind of the narrative of the medium in terms of the kind of topology of spaces more to the front of your mind. So the next sequence, which is in the green space, really, you have the beautiful. I mean, you can go through it. There are plays with color in sequence, but essentially, you end up gazing at an emphatic sort of volume, voluptuous volume, which is soft. It's fabric again, and that it's kind of you see 6 works, I think, are in that volume, and the idea is that you're invited to enter. So it's a bit of a, you come into the space and you see it, but you're denied the content, but you see this thing sparkling, so you're invited to kind of take a journey into it and to become a collective, to become a community with other people as you kind of gather in that space. And as you move on, there's a kind of knuckle moment, which is sort of twinned, where working with a team, the notion of working with Bill T. Jones' extraordinary 3-dimensional work, which for me is a kind of masterpiece, where a performance artist does a piece of visual work, which is kind of goes beyond what you think of both, which is kind of interesting. And Kentridge's incredible, recapturing of the techniques of the early trajectory of this medium and somehow to turn it into a kind of craft art form. So it becomes this kind of knuckle moment in the middle of the plan where you know, from the blue you see it's one sequence and you move into the green, and then from the green as you move into the last sequence, which is the red, you pass Kentrix. There's this kind of hinge moment. And then you come into the last space, which is a red space. And in a way, the red space is this kind of moment, it's really trying to talk about the beginning of the 21st century. The notion of we call it, I mean, it's been named the we tubes. It's a kind of different kind of collective, because here you are somehow an individual in this space, because you have screens which talk to you sort of individually, but somehow we consume the content sort of globally. We all consume this content. So there's a kind of new sense of community being made, one which is a kind of a bodily kind of community which gathers in space, which is the green thing, and then in the red space it's really a kind of much more sort of digital, sort of information-based connectivity. And the kind of way in which different kinds of work play with the sense of history and the sense of the future, it's very interesting. There are kind of very personal stories happening in this place, and in a way the constructions of the space also are much more articulated, where you sort of enter, you know, almost sets with information.
Typically in the past, as a longtime art critic, you go to a video show and you don't have much control over your body because there can be a sensory assault.
Correct.
So here is a space that, as I experienced yesterday, is clearly a public space, but at the same time you're actually afforded the opportunity to be private and public at certain intervals. Was that intentional? Has this been an opportunity for you to bring those two poles of your practice closer together?
These two are I think the sort of themes that I'm concerned with continually. At the sort of back of the idea of the private and public and all these things are, for me, notions about the void and light.
Is this your first temporary architecture that you've done?
I have been exploring temporary architecture. I'm really fascinated by it because it's a kind of, for me, a fantastic arena for an architect to rehearse, actually, in a weird way. But this is a work where it is more than that. It's really a kind of demonstration of an idea that is complete. I'm calling it a topology, because for me it really is something that needs to be kind of mined and researched and more work done on it. But I think it's something that actually I think institutions are going to have to get to grips with, in terms of, I think that as more and more of this work is made, how do you choreograph this in institutions is going to become a big issue.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.